The Denver Broncos got a deal done with wide receiver Courtland Sutton. He's got a 4-year deal to become a Bronco for life. We'll tell you all about that, as well as some updates from training camp here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It's a big day for the Denver Broncos, their fans, and obviously wide receiver Courtland Sutton, who got a 4-year contract worth $92 million in total money to become a Bronco for life. Courtland Sutton getting his third contract from the Denver Broncos. We'll tell you what it means. We'll tell you why the Broncos wanted to get this deal done with Sutton and why he's worth that price of admission to keep around. But Broncos Country, thank you so much for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. We've got a lot to unpack today, from Courtland Sutton's contract to a positive update regarding linebacker Drew Sanders and the prognosis after his MRI, as well as other training camp standouts. And today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Of course, the big news of the day, Courtland Sutton getting a 4-year, $92 million deal, $23 million in average annual contract value, to get this guy in the fold for the long haul. And of course, this was something that's been kind of working on behind the scenes for quite some time now for the Denver Broncos. It's a contract that now runs through 2029, and it gives Courtland Sutton the chance to finish his career in Denver, which is very, very exciting considering where the team was when he was drafted as one of the worst teams in the NFL and what he's been through as a professional with the Denver Broncos as well. But of course, Broncos Country, it's great to have these deals getting done. It's great to, when you're winning games, right? That's why you extend guys like this, is because you're having success as a team. And ultimately, these types of deals don't get done if you don't have a vision as a team, or if you're not having success as a team. And Courtland Sutton is a player that the Denver Broncos have been kind of rejecting trades for in the past. They reworked his deal last year to keep him around and sort of give him a shot to prove that he really belongs in that long-term contract category once again. And this is representative of not only what Courtland does on the field, but the type of leader he is, the way that he's bought into the vision of Sean Payton since the very beginning back in 2023, when that's really all there was, is a vision. And Sean Payton talked about that after practice, that the sales pitch for this team in 2025 with a young quarterback and having just made the playoffs is vastly different than the one from 2023, where you're selling a vision. You're trying to sell these veteran players to buy in to something that they've been hearing for their whole career. If you're a guy like Courtland Sutton, you've heard numerous coaches come in and sell you a vision on, hey, we want to do this, we want to do that, we're going to be this, we're going to be that. I mean, Courtland has been certainly a good soldier in that regard throughout the years, right? I mean, he's bought into just about everything, to every quarterback. And of course, he's done his part, especially in 2019 when he made the Pro Bowl for the very first time and was absolutely outstanding, regardless of Joe Flacco, Brandon Allen, Drew Lock throwing him passes. And he's had to endure that quarterback carousel for the Denver Broncos. And he's done tremendous, especially these last 2 years, setting a career high with 10 touchdown catches in 2023 when Russell Wilson was the quarterback, and then following that up with another 8 touchdown catches this past year. And I do believe that the Broncos are justified in giving Sutton this type of deal. This is almost exactly the type of deal that we saw Calvin Ridley get last year from the Tennessee Titans. It's almost a verbatim contract in terms of the average annual value and total money. So it's one of those things to where you really believe that the Broncos felt like, okay, we see the market increasing at the wide receiver position. We want to get this deal done as soon as we possibly can. And I believe that Courtland Sutton has earned this type of contract. The guaranteed money is what we're kind of waiting on at this point, but Calvin Ridley got $50 million in guaranteed money. Wouldn't surprise me at all if Courtland got even more than that, but he deserves it. And he's a really great example of what this Denver Broncos team is all about, is somebody that you feel like you can build around, even if like the debate around Courtland Sutton has always been the same, right? Is he truly a wide receiver one or is he not? And I think that a lot of folks split hairs over that. I don't believe necessarily that he's in that Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson category of wide receiver, but you don't have to be. In today's NFL, you can get the job done with a variety of different guys out there, and Sutton is capable of kind of dominating and taking over games. And we've seen that in the past. Just hasn't been as consistent as you would like from a guy who carries that wide receiver one designation. And ultimately, I think his pay is reflective of that, right? I mean, yes, his age is also reflective of what he's getting paid here, but at the same time, for a guy like Courtland Sutton to get a $92 million contract is reflective of the fact that he goes about his work in the way that the team wants him to do it, and they believe that he can be a fixture during what I hope is a long championship window for the team. With Bo Nix at the quarterback position, they've now locked in Bo's wide receiver one. And yes, I do believe there's that untapped potential, even with a guy who's been in the league since 2018, because Courtland Sutton has constantly had to deal with the fact that he's really been the only guy in this Denver Broncos offense. And even when he's had help, there's been sort of qualifiers that go along with that, or asterisks that go along with that, right? When you have Jerry Jeudy around, your quarterback play is as bad as it's ever been. When you finally get other guys around you healthy, your offensive play calling is as bad as it's ever been. You got quarterbacks going through injuries. You got inconsistencies in the running game, preventing you from getting, your great matchups throughout the course of a game, or becoming way too predictable by always playing from behind. I don't think there's a bunch of excuses that we need to make for Courtland Sutton, but I do believe there are a lot of reasons why he could really catapult going forward for the Denver Broncos, because now you've got Evan Ingram in the mix. You've got young receivers ready to break out like Marvin Mims, Devon Vele, Troy Franklin, and then Pat Bryant, who's coming on early at training camp. You've got all these pieces. The running game is expected to be vastly improved here in 2025. You just feel like Courtland is getting ready to potentially face arguably the best matchups that he's seen in the NFL. And to me, that would indicate that there's a chance that we could see better from Courtland Sutton now as he's approaching his late 20s, right? Or in his late 20s, we could see a better version of him now than we did early on in his NFL career when he was dealing with all those other uncontrollable factors out there on the field. So great news for the Denver Broncos, in my opinion, to get Courtland Sutton signed to this long-term deal, to bring him in. Had over 1,000 receiving yards last year, 8 touchdowns. And I also believe that you could see just an improved chemistry between he and Bo Nix. I don't think that's impossible either. Those guys have only had 1 year together on the job. And how many times did we see Courtland Sutton get multiple years in a row with the same quarterback, right? So it's going to be very exciting to see how those two can build on what they did last year, where it was really productive and arguably the best year of Sutton's career on a per target basis. He was outstanding for the Denver Broncos last season. Although, again, we want to see more of a consistent week to week, and maybe it's the target share. Maybe that's all that it is we got to get Courtland the ball even more than we were. So we'll see what the Denver Broncos do in terms of that. But for now, you can be excited, Broncos country, because wide receiver one in Denver, Courtland Sutton, he is under contract for the foreseeable future. If you were thinking about buying that Courtland Sutton jersey, maybe now is the time to do so if you don't already have one. But he's under contract for the next 4 years. 4 years, $92 million, $23 million a year. Very justifiable based on comparables around the league, and a very fair price once again for the Denver Broncos, who we'll see what the implications are in terms of their present salary cap situation. And obviously you'll monitor, okay, who's next on the board? Is it Zach Allen? Is it Nick Bonito? Is it John Franklin Myers? Now that Courtland Sutton's deal is done and in the books and signed, you can move on to other players and get maybe some more deals done here as training camp continues to roll along. In Broncos country, speaking of player news, obviously we were all waiting with bated breath at what the prognosis was going to be for linebacker Drew Sanders. He was carted off the field on Saturday. Fortunately for him, according to Sean Payton, sounds like maybe a best case scenario given the injury that he did suffer. We'll tell you his timeline for a return to the field, which is going to happen in 2025. But Broncos country, we'll talk about Drew Sanders and much more from training camp coming up next on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. Fantasy football is back, so fire up the group chat, get your draft board ready, and buckle up for a season filled with breakouts, busts, and all the overreactions we live for. It's all going down on Yahoo Fantasy. This year, me and my buddies that have been in a league since high school, we're playing on Yahoo Fantasy again, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. Like I said, I've been using Yahoo Fantasy for years. The draft day experience and the app, they're both very, very smooth. And you know what? That smack talk hits just a little bit different within the Yahoo app. So to celebrate 28 years of fantasy greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over the next 28 days, giving you more ways to play, more ways to draft, and more ways to win. It all begins August 4th. So stay tuned and get started by creating or joining a Yahoo Fantasy Football League at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. That's yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. And let's make this fantasy season the best one yet. Drew Sanders was carted off the field at Saturday's Denver Broncos training camp practice. And of course, anytime a player gets carted off the field, it does not look good. But Broncos Country Sean Payton, he provided a positive update regarding Sanders and his injury, what it looks like for him to get back onto the field here in 2025. And we'll tell you all about that coming up next on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. But want to just say a quick thank you to all of you that make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. If you haven't already done so and you're listening to this or watching this, hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts as well as on YouTube and become part of the discussion. We always love engaging with other members of Broncos Country and making you part of the show here at Locked On Broncos. So let's talk about Drew Sanders. Of course, guy gets carted off the field and you get plenty of comments saying, hey, this guy's cooked. This guy's never going to be able to play. This guy's always injured. This guy's made of glass, things like that. Got to hold out and reserve a little bit of judgment here. Of course, football is a very physical game, and these guys deal with a lot of different stuff. And so Drew Sanders, obviously, it's been frustrating from a fan perspective to watch over the last two seasons where he's changing positions, he's struggling with injuries, struggling to stay on the field, and you want a guy like that to succeed, right? You don't want situations like we saw last year with Greg Dulcich, where ultimately the team just got too frustrated. You can't keep a guy around. You can't keep a guy who can't stay available, can't stay on the field, or isn't producing when he does get chances to be out there on the field. So I get the tension and the frustration with Drew Sanders, but according to head coach Sean Payton after practice on Monday, sounds like a 4 to 6 week, potentially up to 8 week recovery process for Drew Sanders. And that, according to Payton, was kind of the best case scenario because after he had the MRI, it was discovered that it was a ligament tear, not a tendon situation. And that's good news because the Broncos don't want Drew dealing with any sort of tendon tears. The ligament tear is something that they can work their way back from, apparently. And according to Payton, now Drew is just weighing the options of whether or not to get surgery. And there's been situations where both have been successful in recent history to kind of look at as sort of a reference point for him. So we'll see what ends up happening there. And of course, we'll keep you updated as that situation progresses along. But if we go with the maximum amount of time, right, up to 8 weeks off the field, that would obviously put Drew Sanders out into late September, which means that we're likely to see him start the season on injured reserve, and players can be brought back off of that. They don't have to be added to the 53-man roster first anymore. He can go on injured reserve at the end of camp when they make roster cuts and things like that, and he could still come back this season. And I do believe that we'll see the Broncos bring Drew back when he's ready to go, and he'll be an asset to this team. Depth at the linebacker position has been tested, to say the least, over the last couple of years, right? And now it's being tested with his injury. Alex Singleton walked off the field with trainers, although doesn't sound like there's anything to worry about there. According to Sean Payton, actually, he was kind of just talking about how the duo of Dre Greenlaw and Alex Singleton, those guys have the potential to really mesh well together. Payton said that he believes those two guys have complementary skills out there, and even compared Dre Greenlaw to Mike Tyson, the boxer, right? And he said that's just kind of how he hits out there. He's a tough, nasty, physical dude, and somebody that when the pads come on, Payton's like, you hear him, right? So he's that type of physical playmaker at the linebacker position, whereas Alex Singleton is that guy who just flies around the field and flies to the football. And it's a difference of, you have one guy that's sort of an enforcer and one guy who's sort of a tackling machine, right? And I think Dre Greenlaw brings to the table what the Broncos have been missing at that position. And so, of course, we want to see him stay healthy to begin this season. And if those two guys can stay healthy, I think that Dre makes Alex that much better. I don't think that Alex is always going to just be weighing down the defense as one of the, the weak links on the team. Coming back from injury, you sort of are slightly pessimistic, maybe cautiously optimistic is a better way to put it, when it comes to Singleton returning to form, because this is a guy that had 177 tackles in 2023. So he is a machine. And back then he was making a lot more plays behind the line of scrimmage. When Josie Jewell left and we saw him take on a different role in 2024, it wasn't exactly the same level of production. But with somebody next to him that he can trust, like Dre Greenlaw, you really get the sense that somebody like Singleton can come back strong from his injury. And the Broncos obviously believe that as well, because they didn't make a ton of moves to upgrade linebacker this offseason. They kind of went with, other than Dre Greenlaw, right? They went with kind of the status quo. You bring back Justin Sternat, who played pretty well last year in his opportunity. You bring back guys like Lavelle Bailey, 2024 undrafted free agent that the team really likes. And then you've got a couple of other guys competing out there for roster spots. And so the injury to Drew Sanders, according to Peyton, it's one of those short-term deals instead of more of a long-term deal as far as the roster outlook. But he did acknowledge they'll be looking at all positions, and we'll see what happens at linebacker if they add somebody, because obviously now you probably need another body for camp at the very least. So we'll see if they bring anybody in. But if they bring in another veteran to come in and compete at the position, that could be kind of interesting in terms of the long-term outlook for Drew Sanders with this team. And of course, the team is feeling bad for him, but at the same time, there's the business side of the NFL. And ultimately, eventually you do have to make business level decisions. But because Drew was drafted when Sean Payton was first brought on as Denver Broncos head coach, you can't help but wonder if the leash will be a little bit longer for him, especially because they have kind of flipped him back and forth between the edge and off-ball linebacker, things like that. So we'll continue to update you on any roster situations that go along, injury updates that go along Broncos country. But how about the team getting back out there on the practice field for the first time this offseason with the pads on? Garrett Bowles said after practice, he put it well, it's not really football until the pads come on. And we have plenty to update you on in terms of players who stood out at practice, observations from those who were in attendance, and plenty more coming up on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by Gametime. We've all been there, right? Logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show that you've been dying to see. I mean, live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping, right? That's where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever, and prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. And if you're tired of endless scrolling to find the best deal, Gametime's zone deals, they pick the best seats in your section for you. And if you've ever actually wondered what your seat would look like before you buy a ticket, maybe you're going to a venue you've never been to, their app will show you a panoramic seat view so there's no surprises. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The Denver Broncos were back out on the practice field on Monday with the pads on for the very first time this offseason. And of course, everybody's wondering what the running backs look like, how different guys in the trenches look like, and who's continuing to stand out as training camp rolls along. Once again, Broncos country, thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day. One of the key things that we haven't really gotten much of an update on this offseason, because the team hasn't been wearing pads until Monday's practice, was the running back position. And of course, the trenches, the offensive line, the defensive line, guys getting the opportunity to be a bit more physical with the pads on. And sounds like all of the running backs at the top of the depth chart, meaning J.K. Dobbins, R.J. Harvey, and Jaleel McLaughlin, at least we presume them to be at the top of the depth chart at this point. Sounds like all of those guys looked good out there at practice. Each had a couple of impressive runs. I even saw a couple of different tweets from Zach Stevens and others saying that one run in particular by R.J. Harvey drew some oohs and ahs as the Denver Broncos continue their training camp practice installation period. That's an important note here as well, Broncos Country. It's not like these players are going out there and scrimmaging right now. They are still in the installation phase, which they're doing now with the pads on that they had already done, things that they have already gone through. They're installing it now with the pads on. So it's obviously full speed. Guys are still capable of going out there and standing out and making plays, but it is an installation phase of training camp, which is important to note. I think in the overarching, just kind of, okay, this is the context of what they're doing out there at training camp. A lot of times that context gets lost in the observation, and it does matter in these sorts of things. So they were really working the running game, and I think that you hear some good things about these running backs that are presumed to be at the top of the depth chart. That's what you want. That's exactly what you want. And of course, you want to hear that these guys are staying healthy, but to be looking explosive out there, to be physical, to be bringing to the table exactly what everyone kind of anticipated, that's exactly what the Denver Broncos need from the running game. And how about opening up those running lanes? Well, Ryan Edwards, he said that there were some decent lanes to run through and that both J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey found those lanes to run through. So the vision of these backs is going to be crucial for the Denver Broncos this year, because that's been a problem, quite frankly, over the last couple of years. It's been a big reason why the Broncos haven't really had much success running the football, is because, I mean, the offensive line is opening up the holes and the running backs just either aren't seeing them or not. They're not getting to the hole quick enough. Whatever the case may be, it figures that the running game is going to be one of the most vastly improved areas of this team in 2025. So this was a stepping stone in the right direction. I also found this observation from Ryan Edwards very interesting. He said, Trent Sherfield is underrated, special teams ace, but don't discount an offensive role this year. That is a fascinating observation, because I feel like, at least in terms of my perspective on the Trent Sherfield signing, that was a Tremont Smith 2.0 type of signing. And remember, Tremont provided zero value as a cornerback for the Denver Broncos. And so I've just kind of been assuming that Trent is not going to provide all that much value as a receiver for the Broncos, although he's been better as a receiver in the NFL than Tremont has been at corner. So it's exciting to hear that Trent is out there kind of showing out at receiver as well. The Broncos need that depth. They need that veteran floor raiser out there. And not that you want to see Trent Sherfield catching 50 passes this year. I mean, you want other guys to be stepping up in the offense. But if he can play that sort of veteran, well-rounded role, come up with a tough catch here and then, and play strong special teams for you, man, that could be a really underrated signing for George Paton in this Denver Broncos front office, to bring a guy like that into the mix. So really love that update from Ryan Edwards as well. And then, of course, everybody that's been at training camp has been talking nonstop about Evan Ingram and the impact that he's been making already, catching another number of passes from Bo Nix, showing off his ball control, or his ball skills, his body control, especially near the sideline where he's able to make difficult catches. He just got a great feel for spacing. He's got a great feel for where he's at on the field. He's got a great feel for how to beat certain types of defenders. Really, really excited about the developments that are continually coming out regarding Evan Ingram out there for the Denver Broncos. And then another standout from our good friend Ryan Edwards was Malcolm Roach. I think that Malcolm Roach was called out by George Paton earlier this offseason as one of those signings from last year's free agent class that was quietly one of the most important signings that they made. And frankly, he may be one of their best ones. He's a guy that we talk a lot about, the Courtland Sutton extension, Zach Allen, John Franklin Myers, Nick Bonito. What about Malcolm Roach? He's also entering a contract year this year and has been somebody who has been an absolute culture setter for this Denver Broncos. There's reports that he comes out to training camp practice every single day singing, and you can hear Malcolm Roach, and he's just a big personality for this team and fits really well with the organization. And so maybe he's one of those guys that's been getting underrated in terms of his impact or potential impact in the long term for the Broncos, and somebody that they'd be looking to extend as well. We don't know necessarily where things would be at with him because nothing has been discussed publicly by anybody regarding Malcolm Roach in that regard. But I do believe it would be in the Broncos' best interest to try and keep him around. And of course, you can't keep everybody, right? That's the ugly side of the success that NFL teams experience. You can't always keep everybody, but the way the Broncos have been writing up contracts, like the Courtland Sutton deal, being on par with a deal that was signed by Calvin Ridley last year in Tennessee, I mean, that's indicative right there of the fact that this team knows how to get very reasonable deals done, and they are willing to go maybe higher in the guaranteed money or whatever it may be. If it's upfront money that the player wants, whatever that is, it feels like the Broncos are getting a lot of very team friendly contracts from guys like Pat Surtain, whose contract immediately almost felt like was down at the top 5, at the bottom of the top 5 in terms of cornerback contracts in the league. Quinn Miners, his deal as one of the highest paid offensive guards in the history of the league, that's been dwarfed by other contracts lately as well. And you can think of another number of examples of that across the spectrum on this Broncos roster. Just feels like they're getting really great bang for their buck when it comes to the players that they are signing or re-signing. They're getting guys at bargain prices. So we'll see what ends up happening next to Broncos Country. And of course, we'll have all the training camp updates that you are longing for as camp rolls along. The Broncos will be back out there on the practice field on Tuesday, and you can expect an update from us on everything that goes on, whether it's player performance, if it's hopefully not anything on the injury front, roster moves, whatever it may be. Broncos Country, we appreciate you all so much for rocking with us every single day. We'll catch you on the next episode of the show.